2 plus 2, press enter, we see 4. Now the console is great for experimenting and typing out these single lines of code and then pressing enter, but in the real world, you're going to want to write multiple lines of code at once. Meaning when you push enter, you don't want the computer to execute or run your code right away. So almost like a word processing document with multiple sentences and paragraphs, we want to be able to write out multiple lines of JavaScript code and then have the computer run everything that we just typed. Now, the easiest way to get started practicing this is actually not the console, but instead a website named CodePen. And right now I want you to follow along with me. So you can either Google for CodePen, or you can just visit the address, which is codepen.io. So right now, this very minute, I want you to pause this lesson if you need to, while you go open CodePen in a new tab so you can follow along. In my opinion, CodePen is the easiest way to get started actually writing code. It's free to use, and if you do not want to, you don't even have to create or sign up for an account. You can literally just come to this website and click the Create button that should be somewhere towards the top right. And then from this menu that appears, choose the New Pen option. So Create New Pen. Okay, so what's going on now? What is this screen? Well, each pen that we create is like an empty canvas, or a playground, or playpen, or an experiment where we can code. So we see that there are 3 columns. The first is HTML, and then CSS, and then JS or JavaScript. Now this is a course that is focused on JavaScript, so we are not going to worry too much about these first 2 columns, but the big picture idea is that these are the 3 languages that web pages are created with. And how CodePen works is that as you type in a column, let me shrink this so you can actually see. As you type in a column, so in the HTML column, if I say, hello there, as soon as I stop typing for a second, a preview is shown to me down here of what my code creates. Perfect, except this is not a course on HTML. We want to learn about JavaScript. So just to make it really easy to focus on JavaScript for right now, why don't we hide the HTML and CSS columns? So to do that, all I did was drag on the border, right, this vertical line right between CSS and JavaScript, hover over that, and then click and drag to the left. So that way, the JavaScript column takes up most of our screen, right? Because that's the language that we want to practice. Cool. Now you do not need to do that. It just gives you more room as we're going to be typing in this column. So we now have a perfect environment to start practicing, because in this JavaScript column, we can now type out multiple lines and just keep pressing enter. And each time we type a bit of new code, the computer is going to execute everything that we wrote all at once together, just like an actual real-world computer program. Okay, now having said all of that, let's get back to the actual goal of this particular lesson, right? And that is the topic of functions. So what in the world is a function? Well, I like to think of functions as action words. So if we were comparing JavaScript to a language like English or Spanish, a function would be a verb. So for example, if our pet dog was a computer that spoke JavaScript, we could say run, or jump, or sit. So you simply type out the name of the action or the name of the function, and then you include a pair of parentheses. However, let's be realistic. Our web browser is not a dog, so it can't run, jump, or sit. But it can do web browser-ish things. So for example, let's delete these 3 lines of code, and we can create an annoying pop-up by calling the browser's alert function. So alert and then parentheses, and we can see this pop-up appears. So this is how you can alert the visitor of the site with a message, right? So if you really want to get their attention, you can include a custom message right about here. So let's go ahead and click the button to dismiss the alert pop-up. And within the parentheses for this alert, we can include quotes and then say, hey. And here we can see in the new pop-up, there is our custom message. Cool. Let's go ahead and close or dismiss this pop-up. So the idea is that within the parentheses, you can pass along a bit of data to the function, and it's up to the function as to how it uses that data. So back to the dog example, right? If our dog spoke JavaScript, we could say jump, and maybe first we want to tell the dog to jump high, but then we could also tell the dog to jump again, and maybe this time jump low. So to review, you can call a function simply by including the word and then parentheses, and then inside the parentheses we can pass along a bit of data. The technical name for a piece of data that we pass along is an argument. So altogether, we are calling or executing the browser's alert function, and we are passing it an argument of hey. Okay, so the browser has these different action words or functions like alert that we can call, but we are not limited to only those functions. Because just like you can teach a dog a new trick, we can also teach our JavaScript environment new tricks by creating our own brand new functions. So for example, let's get rid of this line, and if I type out greet and then parentheses, the web browser does not know what this means. The browser does not have a function named greet. So when I say greet and then parentheses, this would be like telling a dog to bake a cake. It's not going to know what you mean, and it's just going to look at you funny. However, as a programmer, we can create our own brand new function named greet, and we simply explain what that action or function should do, and then it will be added to the browser's vocabulary, and we can use or call it just like we would alert or any of the built-in functions. So the question becomes, how do we create a function? Right? We've learned how to call or execute or run a function. Right? This is how you issue a command. You simply type the name of the function and then parentheses. But how do you actually create the recipe or the instructions or the logic for the function? Well, let me show you. So let's start fresh, and we begin by typing the word function, and then a space, and then we get to make up whatever name we want for our new function. The name does not matter. You could call it pizza or unicorn, but in this case, I'm going to name it greet. Then we include a pair of parentheses, and then after the parentheses, we include a pair of curly brackets. If you're not familiar with these characters, you can create them by holding the Shift key and then pressing the key directly to the right of the P key. Okay, and now you don't have to do this, but in between the two curly brackets, I like to push Enter or Return and drop down to a new line like this, just for visual clarity. Okay, but in between the curly brackets, where my cursor is blinking right now, this is what is referred to as the body of the function. And this is where we are free to do just about anything. So this is where we explain what the function should actually do. So just as a quick test, let's set things up so that when you call or run the greet function, an alert pop-up should appear that says, hello, my name is, and then whatever your name is. So inside the curly brackets, let's call the alert function and say, hello, my name is, and then you could put your name instead of my name. All right, and now you might be wondering why an alert pop-up message is not appearing right away. And it's because all we've done here is describe the function or define the function. Right, so this is the recipe for our new greet action. And now if we want it to actually happen, if we want to tell the browser to actually perform the greet function, maybe down here we could just say greet and then parentheses, right? That's how you call a function. And there we can see the pop-up appears, hello, my name is Brad. And if we called the function again, so we call it again, greet a second time, it should appear twice. So here it is once, I click OK. There it is a second time. Perfect. So we just taught the browser a new trick, a new action, or we should say, a new function. Now before we move on, let's improve our function, because it would be nice if it was flexible. Let me explain what I mean by that. So follow along with me. Let's delete these two function calls for greet. And remember when I used the example that a dog can jump, but you could also tell it to jump high or to jump low. And we learned that the data you pass within the parentheses is referred to as an argument, right? And it's up to the function to perhaps use that data in some way. Well, wouldn't it be cool if our greet function was flexible, and when you called it, you could pass in a name instead of hard coding the name right here? So for example, wouldn't it be neat if we could say greet and pass it a value of John, and then it would say, hello, my name is John. And then you could call it again and say greet with a value of Jane, right? And then it would say, hello, my name is Jane. So let me show you how we can set that up. I'm going to go ahead and delete these two function calls so CodePen doesn't drive me insane and keep showing those pop-ups after every keystroke. Okay, so back to the task at hand. How can we make this function flexible? Well, it starts with these parentheses right after the name of our function. Within these parentheses, let's type the letter X. I'm just making that up because it's easy to type, but you could also say the name, or pizza, or unicorn, or anything. So by including this here, we have created a parameter named X. And we can use this parameter within the body of the function. Let me show you what that means. So down here, where we would actually run or call the function, I'm going to place a / right in front of it to comment it out. I'm only doing this so CodePen doesn't try to show the pop-up after every couple of keystrokes. But the idea is, within the parentheses for our function, when we call it, if we include quotes and a name, so greet John, this data that we're passing along, John, we want to be able to access that within our function, within the body of our function. So by including X here as a parameter, X is going to equal the value of whatever gets passed in. So in this case, it would be John. So now within the body of our function, we can use that. So type this out with me. Let's get rid of your name here. So just have, hello, my name is space, and then the quote. And then let's say plus X. And then let's also add on quotes and a closing period to close out the sentence. So now, down here, if we remove the two /, the browser or CodePen will know to actually run or execute it again. And here we see, hello, my name is John. And again, we don't need to use X as the parameter. So up in our function definition, with within these parentheses, we could say the name. And then within the body of our function, we would just say, instead of X, the name. And it works just the same. Okay, so to review, down here we are calling our greet function. We are passing it an argument of John. And then within our function definition, we've included a matching parameter named the name. that's going to temporarily store that value, and then we can use it however we want. So down here we could call the greet function again and say greet and pass it a value of Jane. So when our code runs, we see the first one for John, click OK, there's the one for Jane. Perfect. Now before we move on, I want to show you that you can pass along multiple arguments when you call a function. Let me show you what I mean. But first, let's comment out these two lines with // just so CodePen doesn't drive us insane with the alerts each time we modify the function. Okay, and let's assume that we want to change our greet function to now include the person's favorite color. So, hello, my name is blank, and then let's say plus, pair of quotes, space, and my favorite color is space, and then let's plus fave color, and then add in the quotes for the closing period. Okay, and then how would we use this? Well, down in the function calls, when we say greet and give it a value of John, after the quotes we can just say comma and pass along a second argument. So let's say John's favorite color is blue, and then with Jane after her quotes, comma, and let's say her favorite color is green. Now if we're including two arguments when we call the function, we want to be sure that we include two parameters up in the function definition. So the first thing that gets passed in is the name, and then up here we could say comma fave color, right? Because that's the name that I chose right here. So as soon as I remove these forward slashes to uncomment out our code, we see, hello, my name is John, my favorite color is blue, and hello, my name is Jane, and my favorite color is green. Perfect. Now, practice makes perfect, so before we bring this lesson to a close, I want to write one more function with you. So first I'm going to comment out these two lines so CodePen doesn't keep showing me those pop-ups. Okay, and right below that down here, let's create a function named triple me, or you could do double me or quadruple me, but let's set up a function so that when you pass it a number, maybe it triples that number. So imagine we could say triple me, and then as the argument just give it a number of 5, and we would expect this function to return a value of 15. So let's walk through this. So first we create the function definition, or the recipe for the function. So let's say function space and then the name. You can make one up. I'm calling it triple me, and then parentheses, and then after the parentheses, curly brackets. Okay, now within the parentheses right after triple me, let's include x as a parameter, and now we can use that within the body of the function. Now I do want to let you know that within the body of our function, we do not need to call a browser function like alert. Instead, actually, a function in its purest form simply returns a value. So let's say return, and then what do we want to return? Well, the function is named triple me, so why don't we just say 3, and then asterisk for multiplication, and then whatever number is getting passed in through the argument and parameter, right? In this case, I chose x. Okay, and then let's test this function out. So down here, let's create a variable that stores a number. So let's say let my favorite number equal, and then let's use our function. Let's say triple me, right? We're calling or executing the function, and let's pass it a value of 12. Okay, and then finally we want to test things to make sure that it's actually working. So finally, let's just alert out the value of my favorite number, just so we can see it with our own two eyes. So finally we can say alert my favorite number. Perfect, and there we see 36, right? If you triple 12, you get 36. I know I moved a lot faster for this second example of triple me, but I just wanted to give you something to experiment with, and if you need to re-watch this part a couple of times, that's okay. If everything in this lesson was not crystal clear and you're still a bit confused, that's okay. All you really need to have remembered from this lesson is that there are functions. You can create a function by saying function jump. This creates the recipe or the definition for that function. And then you are free to run or call that function wherever you want, however many times you want. And then of course we learned that you can pass it data inside the parentheses. If this concept is even a little bit familiar to you, if it's making even just a little bit of sense, then you're doing great. You're right on track and you're ready to move on to the next lesson. So we just covered functions. Up next, objects. So what in the world is an object? Let's keep our momentum rolling. Let's answer that question, and I will see you in the next lesson. The 10 Days of JavaScript is the first chapter for my upcoming premium course, Full Stack JavaScript from Scratch. I'm making these first 10 or 11 videos freely available on YouTube, and so for the next 10 days, I'm going to upload. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the 10 Days of JavaScript. Here we are in day number 3, and in this lesson we are going to learn about objects. So what in the world is an object? Well, let's not waste time talking, and instead let's just jump right into the action. So I want you to follow along with me. So right now, go to CodePen, and just like we did in our previous lesson, in the top right we can click Create New Pen, or you can just keep using the same pen from the previous lesson if you still have it up. Okay, and again, in this course we are interested in JavaScript, so I can actually just click and drag this border to hide the other two links. Languages, and let's get started. Okay, now before I show you what an object is, let me first show you what an object is not, so that we understand what problems objects solve. Or in other words, before we learn how to use objects, let's learn why we would use objects. So first we can sort of practice what we've learned in the last 2 lessons. So let's imagine that we want to store a bit of data about a cat. To start, we would need to store the name of the cat. So maybe I would create a variable and say let cat name equal quotes, and then I'll give it a name of Fluffy. Okay, next, let's imagine we need to store the cat's age, or how old the cat is. So maybe create a variable, let cat age, I'm just making up these variable names. You could choose any names you want, but let cat age equal, let's say the cat is 4 years old. Okay, and finally, let's say that this cat should have the ability to meow. So meowing is an action or a verb, so we know that we could maybe create a function named meow. So let's try that. Let's say function meow, parentheses, curly brackets, and inside the body of the function, or inside the curly brackets, let's just show an alert message. So alert, and in the pop-up we can say meow. Okay, now all of this code is perfectly valid. It works without any problems, and we can access the data by simply typing the name of the variable or the name of the function. Right, so for example, if we needed to access the cat's name, we can just type out cat name. We can access their age by just typing cat age, and we can call the meow function by simply saying meow, parentheses, and that will execute the function. There we see meow. However, even though this code technically works, it is not ideal from a staying organized perspective. Because you and I know that these variables and functions are related, right? They all have to do with a cat, but as far as the computer or browser is concerned, these variables and functions have absolutely nothing to do with each other. And this is not ideal for many reasons, but probably the biggest reason is if we were going to collaborate and work with another person on this code, they would not immediately know that these functions and variables are related. They would need to read all of the names and see, cat name, cat age, meow, and they would have to sit there and think and use their own deductive reasoning and decide, yes, these are all cat related. So the question becomes, how can we write our code in a way so that it's painfully obvious that there's a relationship between the name of the cat, the age of the cat, and the ability to meow? Well, the answer is objects. So let's delete everything that we've got here, and let me show you how I would code or write that same data, but using an object instead. So we're starting fresh. Type this out with me. Let cat equal, and now in this context, since this has nothing to do with a function, in this context, curly brackets are how we can create an object. So inside these pair of curly brackets, we can include multiple pieces of data. So I want you to think of an object as a container, and we can store whatever we want inside it. So the first property that I want to store inside this new empty object is the cat's name. So let's say name, colon, and then quotes, Fluffy. And then let's create another property that stores the cat's age. So after the quotes for Fluffy, let's say comma, and then on a new line, I can say age, colon, 4. Now I know the syntax here is a bit weird or unfamiliar, so let's review what's going on. Because I know that in a previous lesson, we learned that you can store a bit of data or create a variable by saying let my name equal Brad. And this syntax that we learned that uses let and the equal sign, this is correct. However, inside an object, we need to do things a bit differently. So for example, outside the context of an object, down here, this is how we create a variable. Right, you choose a name and then you use the equal symbol and then you store whatever data you're wanting to store. Within an object, instead of a variable, we call it a property. So inside the curly brackets, what do we want to store in this object? We just include the name of whatever property we want, so name or age or eye color or fur color. And then after that name for the property, instead of an equal sign, we include a colon. Then we include whatever data we want to store. And then this is important. When you want to include another property, we need to separate them with a comma. Okay, so just like down here where we created a variable that is a simple string of text, well, up here we are creating a variable named cat, but instead of a simple string of text or a number, it is an object. It is of the object data type. This object can store as many properties as we want. So we've got name, Fluffy, age, 4. We could add another one, say comma, eye color, colon, blue. Cool. So one of the advantages of using an object is that it is now immediately clear that these properties are related to one another. The idea is that anything that has to do with this cat lives within this object. This way, instead of having a bunch of different variables floating around with different names, we just have this one cat object or this one cat variable that is self-contained. It's independent. It stores everything it needs. Now you might be wondering, how can we access or use these properties? It's super easy, so check this out. Down here, if I wanted to access the cat's name, you just type cat.name. Right, so we start with the name of the variable, cat, and then we just use the dot or the period to look inside an object. So cat.name would evaluate to Fluffy, We could say cat.age, that would evaluate to 4. Obviously cat.eyecolor would return blue. You get the idea. However, you might be wondering, what happened to the cat's ability to meow? Remember, before we had a function named meow. Well, check this out. Instead of just simple properties that contain a string of text or a number, an object can also contain functions inside it. So after eyecolor blue, let's say comma, and then let's say meow parentheses, right? That's how you create a function. Then after the parentheses, we have curly brackets. So inside the body of this function, let's create an alert message that says meow. Okay, and then down here at the very bottom, outside our object, let's try to run or call the meow function. So we start with cat, right? That's the overall container or object. And then we look inside it with a dot, and then we can just call meow. So the name of the function and then parentheses. There we see our alert, meow. Perfect. So in our previous lesson, we learned about functions, right? This is how you execute or run or call a function. You type out its name and then parentheses. And what we're doing here is no different. We're just looking inside our object, right, with the period, cat.meow. However, even though technically this is a function, meow, when a function lives inside an object or belongs to an object, we refer to it as a method. So the idea is that an object contains properties and methods. Cool. So I think you're starting to see why an object is so useful. You can create this one single entity that contains all of the data and all of the abilities or functions or methods that that object needs. Right? It's organized, it's self-contained. Everything that has to do with the cat lives within these overall curly brackets. And then whenever you want to use it or access it, you just type out the name of the object and look inside it with a dot or a period. And this is cool because it allows us to mirror our data after the way things work in real life. Right? So in the real world, I'm a human being, I'm an object, and I'm a self-contained entity, right? I contain all of my properties and all of my abilities. So Brad.eyecolor, right? Or Brad.age, Brad.height, right? All of the information about me. And then I also have abilities like Brad.walk, right? The name of the method or function, parentheses, Brad.walk, Brad.run, Brad.jump. Cool. Now, before we move on, I just want to clarify that outside the context of an object, when you create a function, you do want to use the keyword function, like function jump, like this. This is what we practiced in our previous lesson. However, within the context of an object, we do not need to include the keyword function. So just like we have the names of our properties, name, age, eye color, we just include another comma and then the name of the function, parentheses, curly brackets. And again, remember, when a function lives inside an object like this, we refer to it as a method. So this is the meow method. Another quick note, I don't want you to be confused by the curly brackets. So in programming, the same character can mean something different in a different context. So on the first line of code, this curly bracket here is signifying the opening or beginning of our object, right? And then down on the very last line, this is closing our object. But then with our meow method, in this context, the curly brackets represent the body of this function, or the body of this method. Hopefully that's not too confusing, but even if it is, don't worry, because we are going to practice this again and again, and you don't need to remember it perfectly right here, right now. Now, I do have some good news. In just a minute or two from now, we are going to do something practical. We are going to leverage the web browser's built-in objects to make something happen when the visitor clicks somewhere on our web page, right down here on the preview section. However, before we get to that, I do want to show you one more theoretical aspect of objects. And that is that within an object, you can nest another object. So follow along with me. For example, maybe after this age property, so age and then we've got 4 and then the comma, let's create another new property named foods, so foods colon, and then instead of including a simple string of text or a number, let's include another object. So curly brackets to create an object. Let's include a comma afterwards. Okay, but then within these curly brackets for this new object, why don't we drop down and we could create 2 new properties, maybe named favorite, right? Their favorite food. Let's say tuna, and then comma, create another property, maybe least favorite, colon, maybe oranges. So the idea here is that within our overall object, we have these properties, right? So name is a string of text, age is a number, and now in this case, the foods property is an object itself. So this curly bracket starts the object, this curly bracket closes the object, and then it can have its own properties like favorite and least favorite. So now outside of the object, if we wanted to access the cat's favorite or least favorite foods, we would just type cat.foods.favorite. The key idea here is that we can use multiple dots within a line of code like this to just keep looking one level deeper inside the objects. So we start with the cat object, we drill inside that and find the foods object, and then we can drill inside that to find the value of favorite or the least favorite properties. So you're not limited, you can nest your data as many layers deep as you need to go. Okay, now having said all of that, let's move on to the practical or fun part of this lesson, and let's set things up so that anytime a visitor clicks on this preview part of the web page, right, this is a preview of what our code is building, let's set it up so that any click opens up an alert message that says, hello there. So how would we do that? Well, our JavaScript environment, in this case the web browser, it brings to the table a bunch of its own pre-built objects. So just like how you and I created the cat object that stored the data and abilities of the cat, the web browser has pre-built objects that store the data and abilities of the web page. And of these different objects, perhaps one of the most useful is the browser's document object. We will learn more about the document object later on in the course, but for now, all you need to know is that it sort of represents the web page as a whole, meaning it's an object that contains all sorts of properties and methods. In this case, if we want to show an alert message anytime someone clicks down here on the page, then technically speaking, that means we want to be on the lookout for the click event. So let's look inside the browser's document object, so document dot, and the document object contains a method named addEventListener. Okay, so we are running or calling this method, addEventListener, and within the parentheses, we need to pass it 2 arguments. So just as a placeholder, I would say a, comma, b. So the first argument, instead of a, we want to pass it which event we are listening for. So for example, you could say click, or what are some other web page events? You could try scroll or key down when someone pushes a key on their keyboard. But we're going to go with click. Okay, but the idea is that the browser has different event keywords that you can listen for. We're listening for the click event. And then the second argument that we want to pass into this function, or I should say this method, is a function that we want to run every time this event happens. So maybe right below this code, why don't we create our own brand new function? So function, and we can give it any name we want. I will name mine my amazing function, parentheses, curly brackets, and inside the body of the function, why don't we just create an alert that says, hello there. Okay, so we've created this function definition. This is the name of the function. Now up on this line of code, when we are calling the web browser's addEventListener method, for the second argument, instead of the B placeholder, I'm just going to say my amazing function. And notice, and this is really important, that I did not include a new pair of parentheses right after the function name here to actually call the function. Because we don't want to run or call or execute this function right here, right now. Instead, we are just passing along the name. We are just passing a reference to the function, and it's up to the web browser's addEventListener method to know when to call this function, right? In this case, it's going to call the function anytime we click anywhere on the page. So if I shrink this so we can actually see the preview area down here, and if I click anywhere on the preview page, we see that our function successfully runs. And if I close the alert and click on the preview page again, perfect. You can see that the addEventListener method is doing its job. So the idea is that we can leverage the web browser's built-in objects in order to make the web page do whatever we want at just the right moment. Now, if everything in this lesson was not crystal clear, that's okay. I do not expect you to remember exactly how we created our cat object from scratch. We will practice that again later in the course. Right now, all you need to know about objects is that you can look inside of them with the dot. If that's at all familiar to you, if it makes even a little bit of sense, you're right on track. Now in our very next lesson, we are going to learn about arrays. So what in the world is an array? Let's keep our momentum rolling, let's answer that question, and I will see you in the next lesson. The 10 Days of JavaScript is the first chapter for my upcoming premium course, Full Stack JavaScript from Scratch. I'm making these first 10 or 11 videos freely available on YouTube, and so for the next 10 days, I'm going to upload one new video each day. So stay tuned, or if you're watching this in the future, all the lessons are up, so feel free to binge watch. The full premium course is not available just yet, but if you subscribe to this channel, you'll be notified as soon as it's out. Or if you're watching this video in the future, it's already available. Enjoy. Hello everyone, welcome back to the 10 Days of JavaScript. Here we are in day number 4, and in this lesson, we are going to learn about arrays. So what in the world is an array? Well, let's ask ourselves, in the English language, how would we use the word array? Well, for example, a car dealership might say that they have cars available in a wide array of colors. And that just means they have a lot of available colors. So when we hear the word array, just think of a collection. It doesn't matter what the collection is of, just that there's a collection made up of multiple items. That's enough of an introduction. Now let's jump right into the code and the action and have you roll up your sleeves and create your first array with JavaScript code. So go ahead and open up CodePen again. You can create a new pen or just use the same pen from the previous lesson if you still have it open. So in a previous lesson, we learned how to store a single value like this. Let my favorite number equal 7. However, what if we wanted to store multiple numbers? So plural, a collection of numbers. Well, we could do this. On a new line, I would say let my favorite numbers equal, the variable name doesn't really matter, you could make anything up, but let's set it to equal square brackets. If you're not familiar with these characters, it's directly to the right of the P key. So it's the same key as the curly bracket key, except this time we do not hold down Shift. So in JavaScript, a pair of square brackets like this is how you create an array. Inside the square brackets, we can include multiple values. So the number 9, and then comma, and I can include another value. Maybe 2, comma 8, comma 3, comma 7, comma 4. The idea is that an array is a collection, right? So now this variable, my favorite numbers, is storing a collection of all of these numbers in memory. And arrays are not limited to just numbers. So on a new line, we could say, let my words equal square brackets for an array. And then we could say red, comma, orange, comma, yellow. Okay, so this array is a collection of strings of text. This array is a collection of numbers. Or we could even create an array that is a collection of objects. So on a new line, we could say, let my pets equal an array, so square brackets, and then instead of including a simple number or a string of text, within the empty pair of square brackets, let's include an object. So this pair of curly brackets could represent a pet, and then we could include another pet by just saying comma and include another object. Okay, and then just as a quick example, we could build out these objects. So within the first pair of curly brackets, our first object could be a cat, and we could give it a property of name, so name colon, and give it a value of meows a lot. After the quotes for meows a lot, we could say comma and include another property, species, colon, and maybe give it a value of cat. Right, so we practiced this object syntax in our previous lesson. from this curly bracket to this curly bracket represents an independent entity or an object, in this case a cat, named Meowsalot. Okay, so this is the first pet in the array. Then in our second pet, within these curly brackets, we could create an object, name. Let's have it be a dog, so let's give it a name of Barks-a-lot. After the quotes, comma, because we want another property within this object, and say species, colon, dog. You get the idea. Okay, now let's ask the really important question that you've probably been screaming at your screen for the last 4.5 minutes, and that is, why? Why would we do this? Why would we want to create collections of values like this? Well, the answer is because collections like these, especially collections of objects like this is really no different from how most apps or websites work. For example, Facebook is really just an array of post objects that you scroll through. Twitter is really just an array of tweet objects that you scroll through. Or your email inbox is really just an array of email objects that you scroll through. So we had an array of pet objects, but imagine if it was your email inbox. Instead of name, maybe this property would be from, and it would have the from email address. And then instead of species, maybe this would be to, and then it would have the to email address. And then maybe there would be another property named body, and that would contain the actual email message itself. The point that I'm trying to make here is that a lot of programming is really just working with arrays. For example, if you were on Facebook and you posted or created a new post, you're really just adding a new item to the array of posts. Or if you were in your email inbox and you deleted an email, you're really just removing an item from an array. So right now, why don't we practice adding a new item to one of our existing arrays, and also we can practice removing an item from one of our arrays. Let's start with adding an item. So imagine down here, we want to write a new line of code that maybe adds the word green to our existing my words array, right? So as of this moment, the array contains the words red, orange, and yellow. So down here, how can we write a bit of code to programmatically add the word green onto the end of this collection? Well, let's begin by working with this variable name. So it's my words, and then a dot to look inside it. And now, right now, you might be thinking to yourself, why a dot? Isn't a dot or a period how we look inside an object? And the answer is yes, it is. An array is actually just a special type of object. It's not exactly the same type of object as we learned about in our previous lesson, but it's a special type of object that has access to its own abilities or methods. And these are abilities and methods that we do not need to add or create ourselves, but rather these are abilities that the array just has out of the box. They're provided by the JavaScript language itself. So for example, all arrays have access to a method named push. So we can say my words dot push. So we are calling this function or method named push, and this is how we can add an item onto the end of an existing array. So within the parentheses for this method or function, we can just include an argument of green. Okay, and now how can we test this out? How can we make sure that the array was actually updated? Well, in previous lessons, we used the alert annoying pop-up to try and test something out, but now I want to show you something a bit easier to use. So our JavaScript environment, in this case the web browser, has an object named console, and we can say console.log, and anything we include within these parentheses will get output or logged to the console. So this is a great way to test your code. It lets you see your values visually so you can make sure that it's working the way that you expect. So why don't we log the my words array out to the console so we can see what it contains. So console.log, in the parentheses, just say my words. Okay, and then how do we actually see the console? Well, if you just right-click down here in the preview part of CodePen, I'm going to choose the Inspect option. Remember, that opens your developer tools, and then just look for the tab named Console. Okay, now you might need to make a slight change to your code in order to have CodePen execute everything once again. So maybe get rid of this and just console log the word hello. And then if you check your console, let me make this a bit easier to read. There we can see hello. Okay, so now we can just change this back. Instead of hello, what we actually want to log out to the console is our myWords variable, our array. So now if we check the console, and here we see the contents of our array, and notice the last item is green. That means that this line of code successfully added green to the end of that array. And this is cool because we did not need to create a function or method named push. The push method is just a native built-in part of the JavaScript language that arrays automatically get access to. And this actually brings us to one of the neatest aspects of JavaScript. So in the JavaScript language, almost everything, not everything, but almost everything, is actually